Hi, you're watching DNA Today, a multi-award winning genetics podcast where we explore everything to do with genetics, from CRISPR to rare diseases to new research. We have won the Science and Medicine Podcast Award for many years now. We have hundreds of episodes, and we really hope you enjoy these conversations where we dive into so many genetic concepts. I'm Kira Deneen, a certified genetic counselor and your host.
I'm sitting at BioCT's event in March 2025, and we're at the lovely Jackson Laboratories, which it's always amazing coming back here because I was at the grand opening 10 and a half years ago. And I'm sitting here with Pamela Gavin, who you're the president of NORD, is that right?
Yes.
What a title.
Thank you, it's an honor.
So we talk about NORD so much on the show. I was able to do an internship with NORD at the Danbury location in Connecticut, which is the town next to where I grew up. So I always drove by it, going to grandpa's house, and it was always there. My mom was like, you should see if you can work with them, do something with them, do something productive. So it's just been great that NORD has such a presence here in Connecticut, but not just in Connecticut, but really worldwide. I mean, it stands for the National Organizations for Rare Diseases, not disorders, right? Because I always get that flip.
It's actually both.
It's both. Okay.
Yeah,
So you know what? I'm not wrong when I say it.
You're not wrong.
Oh,
You're
that's
not
amazing,
wrong.
Pam.
It
Thank you.
says disorders, and our website is Rare Diseases. And
Yes.
because back in the day, one of them wasn't available, so
Is that why?
but you know what?
Yes.
We welcome all rare conditions,
Amazing.
rare diseases. It's all good.
Yeah, and you shared so much great information. There was 2 panels at today's conference, and you were on a panel with other people that are in the patient advocacy space, similar to yourself. There's a lot of different voices on the panel. We just finished that panel, so coming off of that, what are your thoughts of just kind of what you learned about today and different views that were shared?
I think there's no doubt that rare diseases as a community to invest in has a lot of potential. We're here, as you said, at Jackson Labs, and the genomics work that's done here is just unbelievable, fantastic, and the partnerships that they have put in place with other patient organizations and community members, investors, et cetera, and other researchers around the country is really a testament to really what it takes to be successful in rare diseases. It really takes a village, and it was fantastic to see the different areas that people focused on, all of which were bringing progress.
So Pam, NORD is such a hub for rare diseases. As we said, there's such a presence in the globe, not just in Connecticut or even New England or the United States. When people approach you that are patient advocates, usually parents of kids with a rare disease, because as you were speaking, over 50% of people with rare diseases are kids. What advice do you provide and other resources through NORD as these parents are like, we want to start a nonprofit because there isn't one for my kid's disease? How do you start that conversation with them?
Well, it's easy in that that's how NORD got started,
Yes.
by parents. So I think from our point of view, that journey is doable because we've lived it. Different people, from our founders, our original board members, and our staff to some degree. We have a group within our organization called our membership team, membership services team, and we have resources both in-house and then also external resources to help folks who want to start an organization really do the nuts and bolts, from establishing their first C3 to what should the organization structure look like, how does it you start it, and then how does it evolve over time. And so we do have lots of resources and consulting experts who provide pro bono advice, but also connecting them with others who are members of NORD, other patient advocacy organization leaders who like to help mentor others. So is a lot of different resources that we can pull in, and then not only just starting the organization, but connecting them to clinical experts, research experts who either may have experience in their disease or may have an interest in their disease. So it starts to build community even within that condition. So yeah, it's kind of what we do.
That's how you started, right? As a volunteer.
Yes.
And putting into this organization and providing that someone in your family has a rare disease that you shared publicly. And I'm sure that really inspired you to get involved.
It did. It absolutely did. It wasn't originally what I was expecting to do for my career. I spent the first half of my career working in healthcare because I really enjoyed it, but not as a advocate for rare disease. But I used all my business background and experience plus my healthcare knowledge.
That's honestly a perfect background for this position.
Like the healthcare delivery system and, how our hospitals established, how do clinics work and all of that. And then my personal experience through my family of the challenges that people live with. Put it all together and an opportunity to work at NORD came to be. So yeah, it's an honor.
Yeah, I can't imagine just how many people that you affect, an impact of the parents that you're directly advising of how to start these organizations, but the trickle-down effect, because if they're starting an organization, they're helping for that disorder, and it really has a cascade effect there.
That's what we hope. It creates a safe, trusted place for people to connect with, and especially if there isn't a therapy for the condition, because the community will then be focusing on how do we provide the care and support for the day-to-day living so you can live your best life, but then also for those who are interested, how do they put their experiences to work for research? So what many people don't understand is that your average primary care physician is not going to be an expert in 10,000 rare diseases, but
not even
people
close.
Living with those conditions become often the resident experts. And so how do they take that experience and leverage it for the next generation or for the people around today to help the researchers better understand the disease, to help clinicians better understand the disease, to partner with them in ways that creates the wind in the sails for those people who also want to help people living with rare disease.
And that's changed so much, even I would say in the past few years, of patient advocates not only having a responsibility of a person in their family or a loved one or themselves that have a disorder, that they're then advocating for that one person. It's really changed, and hopefully you agree with this in terms of what we've seen really the last few years, that there are now genetic testing companies that have paid salary positions for patient advocates. And as you were alluding to, and more than alluding to, that these patient organizations, advocacy organizations, are key in drug development. Because in order for drug developers or genetic testing companies that are developing genetic tests, they need to know, well, what do patients and families need? What are we trying to help with? And who best to give that information and coordinate with those patients are the patient advocacy organizations. That I don't think I've really come to appreciate that. I would say in the last 6 months, I've learned a lot more about that, but these are real roles now. Are you seeing it the same way I am, or am I a little bit newer to just seeing this aspect of patient advocacy?
It's definitely evolved and become much more mainstream, as you described, of late. Absolutely. And I think because people are seeing the value of it, they're recognizing this is a gap. It's different when you're going to develop a therapy for a common condition for which you can easily recruit thousands of patients. That is not the case for rare conditions. It's flip-flopped around. So the sharp point of the spear really needs to include the patient and caregiver experience and their voices. To just do an assessment of the scientific or medical description of a condition gives you some opportunity for targeted research, but it's not everything. How does that scientific and medical profile lend itself to living with that condition?
Yeah, I think that's so well said, and that these are positions that we really need. And you brought up connecting potential for clinical trials. We need to have people enroll in those. And to tap into that rare disease community for that specific condition can be very hard, understandably, and it should, because we want to protect people that are in that community. So to go through a patient advocacy organization is a really great route and to protect patients, but also for those organizations to come up with patient registries and having a natural history study. These are things that you mentioned on the panel that you were on this afternoon. That is so important, and I don't know if that's really the first step for an organization, as you said, get the 501c, whatever that is, for the nonprofit. Yes, thank you. Knew I'd get some letter off. That's probably step one. But a few steps later is to get that natural history study and to have that patient registry so that you are ready to go in the sense of teaming up with some of these companies or even creating a mouse model. I have to bring that up. We're sitting at Jack's, right?
Yes,
that would be just irresponsible of me not to bring it up.
Totally.
So I think that it's so important to have these organizations. And in order to have the organizations, we need people like NORD, that you're the leaders in helping these organizations start and flourish.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, it's a we try. There's just so
you
much
try
to
and you
do.
succeed in a lot of areas. You really do.
But it is our passion. And yes, starting natural history studies, finding and creating a scientific and medical advisory board or group. And that's why the C3 is so important, because you want this group to help legitimize your organization. If you're going to raise money, if you're going to collect money from people, or if you're going to give money out to research, you need to have that rigor, that corporate rigor around you and the protections that come from that.
Even as a journalist, that's things that I look at to say, I'm looking for an organization. I want to interview a parent of a kid with disorder A. I'm going to start looking at aspects of that as well and say, okay, this is a very legit organization.
That's right.
So I want to reach out to this person because they seem to be, this is like the organization for this disorder. They're the ones I should go to. So it's just endless to make an organization really stand out, and you never know what opportunity is going to come into your inbox.
And social media groups like Facebook groups are wonderful. They're wonderful sources or systematic mechanisms to help support people and bring people together, and they can continue to exist. But if you want to go that next route of getting engaged and doing research about your condition, and that research could be not necessarily bench research, but engaging with the community to better understand, how does this condition progress over time? What are the needs? What are the risks people with this condition are willing to take when it comes to a therapy? What are the biggest of all the symptoms, of all the struggles? What are the ones that have the greatest impact, so people could focus their research there first, potentially? Those are all questions that can be answered by an organization that is a legitimate organization versus a support group, right, that perhaps it does great work providing psychosocial support and resources, but
doesn't have the rigor that an organization would have.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. You mentioned of what we should be focused on in research and development in terms of new treatments, or what I think is someone that doesn't have a child with a rare disorder. I read about a condition and I say, okay, well, that symptom is probably the worst. Maybe that's the one that we need to focus on the most. But then you talk to a parent, you talk to a caregiver, and I've been in interviews where I didn't realize, this other symptom that I wasn't really thinking is impacting as much, like sleep disturbance. We'll link to the episode that I'm referring to that I'm not thinking of in the moment, but talking about this disorder and not being able to sleep through the night, affecting that child, affecting the parents, affecting the siblings. How can you operate when you haven't slept properly since your child was born? So as researchers, we may not realize, and I shouldn't say we because I'm not a researcher, but I feel like I read a lot of research. I'm a reader. Researchers may not realize what is the most important. And I think that's where an organization can also step in to be like, this is what we want to focus on, and having a voice, I think, is so important. I've looked at a lot of different organizations, talked to you. We have over 300 episodes. I would say almost half of which are focused on rare diseases. So you can obviously tell I'm someone that's really from my internship over 10 years ago at NORD. I think that's really just
awesome.
And it's just, once you get into it, someone said it today, that once you are involved in rare disease in some capacity, you really don't leave. You're always involved in some way. I think I'm a good example of that, of not having a personal tie to rare diseases outside of the show. But, looking at a lot of different foundations, one that I think is a very good example of one that's done very well is the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. There's this amazing book, Breath from Salt, and we've interviewed the author on the show, and it's just remarkable to see how they were able to set up their organization, and especially with the way that their finances worked in terms of financing the first drug. And then, I don't know if I'm going to use the right terms, please correct me if you know them, licensing that drug to the next company, taking that money to invest in the next drug, and it's a cycle. And they've been able to fund a lot of drugs in this way, and so much other amazing work that they've been able to do. They've had a lot of big donors, though, behind that, which is part of what their success has come from, with how far they've gotten, and being a disorder that, there is a poster child for, that we've interviewed, Gunnar Esiason from the Boomer Esiason Foundation, everything, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot that they have going for them. But for small, talking nano, ultra, rare diseases in general that are starting these foundations, organizations, what can we learn? Because that's something that you talked about on the panel of, let's not have new organizations go through the trial and error that a lot of people have
That's right.
experienced. Let's start them out. And you use the word catalyst, that NORD is a catalyst to help these organizations start out so that they can learn from the decades of experience NORD and other organizations have had. What are some of those things that we can learn from?
So I'm glad you brought up cystic fibrosis, because they're an amazing organization. They've done incredible work. They started in 1956.
Yeah, we have to acknowledge that.
So, and the world was a different place then. Just like when NORD was established in 1983 as the first umbrella organization for all rare diseases, that was 41 years ago. And back in those days, people wrote letters and faxed through fax machines, right? They drove down or took the train if they were living near a train station to testify in Congress, like our founder, Abby Myers, did, to fight for the passage of the Orphan Drug Act to incentivize companies to study rare disease and develop therapies for rare disease.
And that was a landmark.
It really was, because it made the opportunity for cystic fibrosis and others to say, well, you know what, there's an incentive here, and let's leverage that, right? Let's leverage that. But I think to this whole point of jump-starting these other newer organizations, they don't need to go through that 25-year history or whatever, even longer. They can leapfrog those.
Stand on the shoulders of giants, right? There's that quote about that. Yeah.
Yes, totally. And they have the benefit of the genomic explosion, right? They have the benefit of other technology advancements like social media and the internet. Let's just say the internet, connecting business to business.
That wasn't around when NORD started.
Right. And so we can accelerate our engagement. We can accelerate our access to information. We can accelerate connecting people across the globe.
Which for rare disease is massive. I mean, that's something that we all say. The internet's connecting all of us. But when you're talking about a rare disease, all right, who's in Connecticut? There might be someone else. But when you look at, well, I can talk to this person in Germany, you get your time zones right, you can hop on some platform and chat. So that particularly for rare diseases has been a major game changer.
What member of one of my teams, my management team, she has a child with a rare disease. They're one of 60, and they live in Maine, one of 60 in the world.
One of 60 in the world.
And they're connecting with people and connecting with physicians at Mass General and other institutions. They're not all in the same location, but they're doing amazing, amazing work. And they're building upon that framework, and they're taking the steps to create that C3, to create the scientific and medical advisory committee, to evaluate what kind of publications exist, what have they researched about this condition. You could very easily, you may be able to find some materials that have been published, peer-reviewed journal articles, that may be focusing on something, as you said earlier, that is not really the biggest symptom or the biggest issue affecting daily life. So they can do something about that. They could put out into the public domain additional research, additional information that can serve as a catalyst for others to do research. You may have an investor or a small biotech company that's looking at targets for their technology. And if these organizations, these communities create their virtual presence, they may become visible as a potential target. And so those are the steps to take, and then we help build upon those by creating the connections in those disciplines where people need to find other people, and then the tide goes up and up and up.
Right. Yeah. And I think also with that, having an organization and having companies come to you about, okay, well, we're looking to do this. Can you help us? You might say, hey, hold on, this other company is working on that. They may not be able to say who, if they've signed NDAs and everything, but you might say, you know what, that's actually being worked on right now. Can you work on something else? Instead of two companies working on parallel projects when they could have divided and conquered a little bit. That I've heard that also from patient advocates, that when you become the hub for your rare disease, you really can see everything happening, connecting the right people. It's just endless, I think, of all the nuances I learn about starting an organization that I didn't even think of before interviewing all of these people and really learning what we can glean from this. Something I'm thinking about too, of learning from the panels, and something that we've talked about on the show a lot, is with newborn sequencing. And, you know, it's going to become the new NBS, the newborn screening that we've talked about for so long that even predates NORD. So with that, we're going to identify a lot more kiddos and little babies with rare diseases. We're going to have an influx of people wanting to meet with genetic counselors like myself. And there was a question in the audience today of how are we as a workforce going to figure that out? I'm wondering, coming from your perspective as CEO, president of NORD, how is NORD going to handle the big sharp incline in diagnoses? Because there's so many people that are undiagnosed. There's the undiagnosed disease network. That's kind of, I think of you guys as being different sides of the same coin almost, because a lot of undiagnosed diseases end up being a rare disease, and that's why it takes a while to get a diagnosis. But I digress there. So as newborn sequencing is becoming more and more ubiquitous, and I think we're going to see this adopted, has there been a lot of conversations at NORD about this, of what this is going to look like for rare diseases?
Well, there's a lot of different angles to that. It's a big issue and it's complex. So there's work that we've been doing that's very foundational, which is to tell people, do videos and that describe the nuts and bolts about what genetic testing is and what it isn't.
Because it's both.
Because it's both. Right. And so those are the pieces that we've been working on. We've been also looking at the landscape, working with genetic experts around the country in our network, our Centers of Excellence network. They are all very talented, well-known geneticists in their field as well that are part of that network. And we've been working with them on policies, best practices, and how do you evaluate what kind of legislation, state or federal, is appropriate? Where are we? It's a patch quilt. We're not all in the same place. And so we really needed to recognize what are the things that we want to make sure are part of any future legislation. What are the best practices? What are our policies and best practices when we want to evaluate any legislation that comes across so that we can make sure patients are protected? Part of that also includes, part and parcel really very tightly, is having an appropriate workforce.
I'm scared about that.
You have a good reason to be. It's really, geneticists and genetic counselors. We've had more genetic counselors, more programs, which has been absolutely wonderful.
It's almost doubled since I was applying to school.
It's totally awesome. It's what we need. Genetics they're not going away. It's going to be part of our daily.
I think I picked a good career, right?
You did. Yeah, totally. But there's safeguards we need to put in place, right? This is serious information. And I think a lot of people don't realize this is very much for people who are not in the field to recognize that just because you had a test done doesn't mean you're going to get the answer. And so it's an evolving
Sometimes we just have to do a lot of different testing, and it's
right.
You go through a list, and sometimes you have to revisit testing you already did because it gets better over the years. It's messy.
It's not the perfect panacea, but it's important, and we definitely need to invest in that. And then we also need to make sure that the panel talked about this, focusing on projects where they were looking at doing genetic testing or newborn screening for all rare diseases where there's an approved therapy, because ethically that's an easy one, right?
Do something that is actionable. Right now is something, and it probably should maintain to be a threshold that we need in order to look at a baby's genetics. We're not going to give parents information of a condition that baby's going to have when they're 60. That's not helpful right then. Or something that doesn't have a treatment, as you were alluding to.
However, very quickly, it's going to quickly get to that point where it's like, okay, there's no treatment, but if I knew what my child had, I may be able to get better care or more targeted care that can minimize the impact. So that becomes a slippery slope. And where do we draw the line? I don't think societally we're there yet.
A lot of people that listen to the show are students, people that want to go into the genetics field. And advice that I often give them is obviously shadow. If they want to go into genetic counseling, try to shadow a genetic counselor. That's gotten harder and harder, I think, especially in our endemic that we are with COVID. It's just harder to get an approval to shadow for an hour or a day. So one of the other things I recommend for students is to go on NORD's website and find a organization that catches their eye and just offer to volunteer 5 hours a week with their social media or something, because they tend to be Gen Zers that are really good at social media because they've grown up with it. Yeah. I'm a cusper, so I'll be 30 soon. So I've been in both worlds. Is that something that we need? Because I imagine a lot of these organizations and the ones that I've talked to are parent-run, as you mentioned in the panel, and these parents are inundated with taking care of their kid or founder kids running this organization, also making some kind of income to support their family. So they're pulled in a lot of directions. Should I keep recommending that to people? I think we need that, but I should make sure I'm sending people in the right place.
Yeah. So they could look on our website and look at these organizations. They can also send on our website, we have a form they can fill out if they want to volunteer, and they can describe what they're looking to do. And then we have a volunteer program. I think Darby was that you met.
Darby Gavin. Yes.
She oversees a lot of that, shepherding the volunteers through and matching them. So our member organization, our member department, membership services department, need another cup of coffee, they will match. So there's lots of ways for that connection to be made. Some of them, if they're genetic counseling students, may want to participate on a patient listening session. They may want to
have one of their rotations be with an organization.
Yep. They may want to work on helping them with their natural history study, or maybe analyze data that
maybe
comes
that's
out
their
of their
thesis.
Study. Absolutely. There's so many things they could do.
Yeah.
And they would change people's lives. They would have such an impact.
Yeah. And I think having something on your application that makes you stand out, regardless of where you go in healthcare, genetics, medicine, science, that's such a unique opportunity. And when I was an intern directly with NORD, as opposed to working with one of the organizations that is like listed in your directory, for instance, but you get to be involved in a project very quickly. And you also get to, instead of observing as helpful as that is, and I have plenty of students that observe me as a genetic counselor in sessions, you get to be a part of something and you're really actively doing something. And I really appreciated that. I was part of the student newsletter and organizing that. And so I got to go out and do interviews, and look at me now doing interviews for a full-time job here. So, looking at that, I think it's such a unique way to get involved. And I bet you that internship will stay with you more than others, because you get involved with the family, you get involved with a certain disorder, and you're going to stay involved, just like I have with rare diseases. So Pam, thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you so much for seeking me out. I really appreciate it. It was really a pleasure. And to see you after all these years of your internship. So that's wonderful. It's working.
It is working. NORD has a presence in Connecticut. And I would like to think, and I've said on the show and other public formats that, and saying to patients too, really, that one of the reasons why we have so many diseases on our newborn screening in Connecticut, because there's certain conditions that are on every state in the United States, but then every state can add on conditions. Right. I would like to think that the reason Connecticut has such a robust list is because of NORD's presence in Connecticut and attending all of these different rare disease events like today.
All our advocates, they've been doing some
shoots of different task forces that have happened
that
is
absolutely
through Connecticut. And so I think just, you guys have been going strong for so long. You very much predate my existence. So, I think that's just, NORD is just so wonderful, and I promote you guys as much as I can. And
thank you so much.
Thank you for all the work you're doing. So I think it's becoming a ping pong of thank yous on the show here. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching DNA Today. To access all of our episodes, head over to dnatoday.com. We also have a lot of bonus content on there that you can enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, guest pitches, you name it, send them in to info@dnatoday.com. We'd also really appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more nerds like yourself find the show. Also, if you like giveaways and other ways to connect with us, I recommend following us on social. We're at DNA Today Podcast. We also have a Patreon if you want to be the most level involved in the show. That's also at DNA Today Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Join us next time to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.